Joe Robinson is the founder of Mindful Money LLC, who's dedicated to transforming the lives of those impacted by the criminal legal system through his nationally recognised book, Think Outside the Cell, an entrepreneur's guide for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And Joe is on the line with us here. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks for having me, Toby. Great.
So, before we talk about the book, are you able to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? I guess your career and experiences that shaped what ultimately led you to write the book.
Yeah, certainly. So, I'm from New York City. I grew up in a rough section of Brooklyn, one of the five boroughs. And during the 80s, the 1980s, got caught up in the crack epidemic. It was the height of the crack epidemic, and that led me as a young teenager to get involved in that type of stuff, and ended up incarcerated. And when I was 21, going on 22, and one of the things I realized early on during my incarceration was that my thinking about money and the pursuit of money was one of the things that led me to continue to get in trouble. So while inside, I began reading about personal finance and entrepreneurship, and began teaching classes. And then I ultimately, in 2007, after meeting my wife in 2002, wrote and published my book in 2007, Think Outside the Cell, an entrepreneur's guide for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And so now I finally, after all these years, have revived it. So it's a lot more new content, especially about the internet, social media, those type of things, which I didn't know much about while
Yeah.
I was inside. Yeah.
And what was it that actually made you personally turn your life around, I suppose, from being a prisoner to being a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, so for me, to be honest, it was a couple of things, but I was tired of being, locked up. I just,
Yeah.
I mean, no one likes it, but I was like, I have to do something about it, and I have to really get at the root of it, because like I said, I was done. I was like, this is not me. I was in prison, but not of prison. And so again, I was fortunate in that in my early 20s, within 2 years of being incarcerated, I was like, okay, this has got to stop. I don't want to ever experience this again. I had a 2-year-old son that I left, behind, and his mom, So one thing about incarceration is it's not just the person who's in prison who's doing time, but everyone who loves them, who cares about them. And so I was doing it for them as well. And yeah, so I went to the general library in the prison that I was in at the time, and started, excuse me, and started reading up books about. The first one was about entrepreneurship. It was about how to start a mail order business. So that shows you how long ago that was. But yeah, and then I was hooked, and I always like money. I mean, who doesn't like money? But
Yeah.
it was about not just the acquisition of money, but it's about how to get it the right way without harming people, and instead helping people. I'm a natural teacher. I'm the oldest of five children that my mom had, and so when I used to babysit, I used to teach them. I used to
Yeah.
spend time teaching, so I love to teach. I started teaching in 1995 while still incarcerated. That was my first class on personal finance, and then I've never stopped. So I've been doing it almost 30 years.
And when it comes to the book, Think Outside the Cell, do you include any of your own personal experiences, or is it just simply the advice itself?
No, I do. I start off with, and throughout the piece, I use my own experience. And I think that's why it resonates with people who have, especially for people who have the similar lived experience. But anybody
Yeah.
can benefit from it, even though it's directed at people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. Lots of other people have read it, and because it's very accessible, and without being preachy or anything like that. But to
Yeah.
answer your question, yes, I start off the first chapter, Change Your Mind, Change Your Life. And I talk about how the transformation or shift in mindset that I had is possible for others. So I do, in everything I do, pretty much, to be honest, whether it's presentations, my writing, whether it's books or articles, I always give a little bit of myself. That's just my way. So yeah, I do get into that, and I talk about, for example, early on in my book, how there was a point early in my incarceration where there was the state, New York State. There was a what do you call it? Like not restitution, something like restitution, but like a fee that I had to pay, like court fees or something like that, and it was
Yeah.
a couple of $100. In the bigger scheme of things, it wasn't a whole lot, but it was a lot for someone who didn't have any money. And so
Yeah.
they took all my money, right? And it felt awful. I had nothing. I didn't have to reach out to people, and I said, I don't want to experience this again. I really have to not come to prison. I have to think of ways to make money legally and do good in the world. I knew that it was, even though I was in prison, like I said, I was not of prison. I never embraced it. So think outside the cell was both literal and figurative for me. It was really, I was like literally thinking outside the cell, not seeing
Yeah.
myself as a prisoner, but seeing as myself outside the cell.
That's an interesting thought because most people would probably see that title and just assume it's kind of a pun on think outside the box, which
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
guess it is as well, but
Yeah.
it has two meanings. It's literal as well.
Yes. Yes. It is literal. It is literal. Yes. Yes.
And what was it that drove you to actually sit down and write this book? And why did you feel that you had to do it?
Yeah, good question. So from 1995 until I, sat down to write the book, as you said, I taught a whole bunch of classes in that span of time on both personal finance and entrepreneurship. And I went on to also bring on other incarcerated men, my peers, who co-facilitate. So at one time, in terms of entrepreneurship, like in the early 2000s, like 2000, maybe three and four, I had like seven facilitators. Like I trained them, and then they also taught classes so that we could reach more people inside the prison. So at one time, we had two classes going on at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really, we did some amazing work. And people would come to me and ask all sorts of questions, about personal finance and entrepreneurship. I'd give it, freely give advice. But then at some point I was like, man, I can make money off this. Why am I
Yeah.
giving this free advice? So, I mean, that was part of the motivation, to be honest. I was, and I could reach more people. It's one thing to do one-on-one and someone's asking me for some advice. You produce a book once and you can reach the masses. And so that's what I set out to do. So in 2006, I believe, late 2006 is when I started working on it while incarcerated. I was incarcerated at this time, and met my wife through correspondence. My wife Sheila Rule, through correspondence, and in 2002, then 2003, we started seeing her on visits, and then we got married while I was incarcerated in 2005, January 25th, coming up on 19 years now of marriage. And she's a former senior editor at the New York Times, and so an excellent writer and editor. So I wrote it. I would send chapters to her, and then she'd edit and make comments, and then we'd go back and forth until it was a complete book. So that's how we did it.
And that's quite remarkable, meeting your wife through correspondence. There's something quite weird about it, but also it's actually quite
Yeah.
romantic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's an interesting story. There's been a documentary that's been made on us. We've been in documentaries about our stories. We still have our letters. We have hundreds of letters. Yeah, that we've collected. So we have a whole file cabinet of letters organized in chronological order and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, it's really something.
Wow.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, what do you hope to accomplish with the book, and what impact do you hope it will have on the readers?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Toby. So, the impact that I'd like to have is particularly for people who are impacted directly or indirectly by the criminal justice system. And I say indirectly because, as I mentioned earlier, not only is the person who's doing time incarcerated, and but the people who love them, it's like invisible chains or invisible bars, right? But they nonetheless they're still incarcerated by having to pay the phone bills, having to travel hundreds of miles often to send food packages and other things. And so, what I want to get across is that one, that we are all more than our worst choices, right? That because a person commits a crime, doesn't necessarily define them or should not define them for the rest of their lives, and that it's also incumbent upon the person to really do some serious introspection and think about how they got to that point, meaning literally to incarceration, what their thinking was like, what their backstory and experiences were, and how they can shift it and how they can change it. And I talk about mindset in the book because it is about thinking. It is about shifting the mindset. If you see yourself differently, you will behave differently. And
Yeah.
so entrepreneurship, I think, is one of the no pun intended, but the richest ways for a person to take ownership of their lives as opposed to working for someone else, for example, right?
Yeah.
And in the case of people who are impacted directly and indirectly by the criminal justice system, there are so many. I'm sure it's the same thing on the other side of the pond, as they say. It's certainly the case in the United States. There's so much discrimination, right? There's such a stigma attached to people who have criminal convictions that it makes it very difficult for them to get jobs and housing. And so the book is intended to inspire people, to give them hope, and to give them real down to earth, right? Plain English guidance on how they can take an idea and take their shifted mindset, right, to do good in the world, to create businesses of different sizes. I mean, it doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
huge business. So yeah, it's about ownership. The big thing that I talk about is having an ownership mindset as opposed to a consumer mindset.
And how do you envision your book contributing to maybe changing the narrative about those who are incarcerated?
Yeah, well, this revised edition of the book, I am thinking more broadly now. So this book, in combination with future books that I have planned, my next one is going to profile 10 people, 10 formerly incarcerated people across the country or the world, for that matter, who currently run successful businesses. So I think we are visual people, I would say, meaning just people in general. And so I hope to have people begin to think differently about this population by seeing people like myself and others do good work, meaning do in terms of entrepreneurship and in terms of nonprofit, organizations and other things, and other things. So it really, I think that over time, that attitudes and beliefs will change if we see on the news, for example, instead of someone being, carted away in handcuffs, that you see them working with young kids in some youth program or something like that, someone who's formerly incarcerated, or they have some business that's providing goods and services that's a benefit to whomever, the target audience is. So yeah, I think it's those kind of incremental things and having real life examples such as my own
Yeah.
that will shape attitudes.
Who would you say the book is for? Because, of course, as you've mentioned a few times, it's not just the person who is incarcerated that is affected, it's the people
Mm-hmm.
around them. So, is there a broad range of
Mm-hmm.
people that can benefit from this book?
Yeah. So again, yeah, it is for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, but for their loved ones and supporters. I had, like, for example, someone bought 3 copies of the book yesterday, and emailed me and said that they bought it so that they could send to 3 people, right? Meaning people who they thought who would directly benefit from it. So there's a lot of people who, while they may not have had, luckily, would not have had the experience with incarceration, and may not even be indirectly affected by it, but they care about the issues. They care about it, right? I just, for example, this morning received on LinkedIn an invitation, from a woman who writes about prison education. So she reached out to me. So I'm, of course, I, want to talk to her. She has like over 10,000 followers, so I definitely want to talk
Yeah.
to her. But yeah, so that's what I mean. That there are people who care about people in prison, right? There are people who don't care, of course. There are probably more of them, who say, they committed crimes, to hell with them, right? But again, we're not the worst decision that we've made. We've all done stuff, even whether it's legal or not, that we are ashamed of, that we wish we hadn't done or whatever. The thing is, I think that we have, in general, most people have redeemable qualities, and so short answer is, I think anybody who cares about people who are incarcerated, and not just cares about it, but we want to reduce recidivism. So that's one of the things. I mean, I don't, the fact that in the United States, like 2 out of 3 people return to prison within the first 3 years, that's awful. That's an
Wow.
awful statistic. That's an awful statistic. Why is that? What we failed as a society. I mean, when it comes to that. So again, the book is intended to give people opportunities, right? When I grew up in the 80s, like I said, during the height of the crack era, all I saw was crack, and this was during the Reagan administration. It was all about materialism, fashion and this and that. I was a young teenager, so I was influenced by that stuff. Now I understand that money is just a tool, so it's not about like worshiping money, anything like that. It's a means to an end, and it should be an expression of our values, our core values, not the ones that we pick up from society and social media and TV and all that, but our core values, as human beings.
Yeah. As well as having this book, of course, as I mentioned in the intro, you're the founder of Mindful Money LLC. So, can you tell us a little bit about the company and its mission to transform the lives of people?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, yeah, so Mindful Money is a personal finance education company that has now books, but I also am in the process of relaunching my blog, and podcast. So it's different components, but like I said, it's an education company. So there'll be books, there's my blog, there's my podcast, and there'll be speaking engagements. I'm open to speaking engagements. I've done, in fact, 2 weeks ago I did one, and I have some other ones, local ones right now. But yeah, it's an education company that's intended to shape the thinking of people who are directly and indirectly impacted by crime, by incarceration, by teaching them again personal finance and entrepreneurship. When it comes to personal finance, I have a three. I'll be really quick because I know I'm going to be mindful of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a three-part, framework, which is mindfulness, mindset, ownership mindset, and money management. So it's a three-tier framework that I try to communicate throughout all the different aspects of the company.
Yeah. Now, what else are you working on at the moment, both within Mindful Money LLC and indeed future books? Have you got any plans for them?
Yeah, I have quite a few. So, the next book, like I said, is going to profile 10 people who are formerly incarcerated men and women, or however people identify themselves, but formerly incarcerated people who are currently successful business owners, because we need to see that not just the people who are, like I said, impacted by the justice system, but people in general need to see that there are real people happen to have done time but are doing good work in the community. It's really important. So that's one book. And then I have a couple other books. I have about 4 or 5 books lined up. My memoir, yeah, I'm a writer. So my memoir is going to come out next December, and it's going to talk about my experiences during the crack era. I lost my mom in 2019, but prior to that, during the crack era, she succumbed to addiction. She, became addicted to crack, and it devastated my family, devastated me. I went from being a bright, engaged student to then dropping out of school and hanging out with the wrong crowd and all that. So that one is called Losing Mama, One Family's Ongoing Recovery from the Crack Epidemic. All right. So that is like 90 something percent done. That will be out next December. So again, I have about 4 or 5 books lined up. The podcast will launch in the first week of January, probably January 1st. And that's from bars to balance sheets, right? That's going to be the name of the podcast. And yeah, so just I want to do more speaking engagements, though. I
Oh,
love to teach.
yes.
I love to connect with people in that way. And I can, I'm open to doing it virtually as well, so it doesn't have to be in person. If someone across the pond, would like to have me
Yeah.
do a speaking engagement, I'd love to do it. I love to teach and connect with people in that way. And we also, let me just say this really briefly. So, my wife and I published 3 other books some years ago. And for anybody who purchases a copy of my book, Think Outside the Cell, and it purchases the book, and once they receive it, if they take a picture with the book and email me the picture with their contact information, I'll mail them for free one of our three. We have a 3 book series. It's anthologies, right? So one is Counting the Years. It's called Counting the Years. Real life stories about waiting for loved ones to return home from prison. One is called The Hard Journey Home. Real life stories about re-entering society after incarceration. And then the third one is called Love Lives Here Too. Real life stories about prison marriages and relationships. So they can get one of the 3 books for free. I'll mail it wherever, anywhere in the world. I'll mail it. If, like I said, they purchase a copy of my book, Think Outside the Cell, take a picture of it with themselves with the book, and email me at mindfulmoneyllc@gmail.com.
Excellent. Well, this current book is, of course, called Think Outside the Cell, an entrepreneur's guide for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. So where are all the places that we're able to find that?
So right now it's currently on Amazon. So that's where it's at now. I don't have it in bookstores yet, but it will be. But everybody can order from Amazon. Amazon.com. It's easy to find. So it's in both print, soft cover print, and also an ebook. It's also an ebook, so you can get either format.
Brilliant. Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great to talk to you today.
Thank you, Toby. This has been great. I appreciate it.